All right. I think with that, let's get to our next major topic, and we'll see how long we spend on that. But we were talking about video game addiction. I think we've spoken about this in the past, but Rob missed, I think, our previous talk about it. So I'm going to let you start off with this. So you were just talking about this before the stream. You saw my talk about the Games for Change organization was trying to promote healthy video games and serious topics. So what do you think about when it comes to video game addiction?
Well, I know one of the things that struck me when this announcement was made. There was a lot of, we are a very reactionary people as
Mm-hmm.
gamers, and anyone who says something bad about us, we tend to react. But I don't necessarily think that this is one of those times where we need to say, hey, well, we should investigate this more, or we should, find out more about it. Well, chances are the World Health Organization did a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
research. So it's okay to trust that they have come to a conclusion based on scientific study. Um, and so it is safe to say, and I have no doubts about this because we all know people who have
Mm-hmm.
given up a lot of their life to one or more games, be it taking time away from friends and family, spending too much money on games, that kind of thing. And so when we say I'm addicted to a game, it's like hard for me to believe that there isn't an actual problem with addiction. All of the
Mm-hmm.
stories we hear about people who have gone days without eating or sleeping,
Mm-hmm.
playing a game and even dying or whatever. Um, and that's not for Dracon. That's a reasonable thing to state, that the problem is parents will automatically assume
Mm-hmm.
their child is addicted, except that that is how people treat sicknesses anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's something the games industry should jump on first. Like the Wii already did this years ago. If you played for too long, it would say, "Hey, maybe it's time to step away from the game right now," and you could ignore it or whatever, and it's a nuisance. But that is a measure to be taken against that. The game industry can say, "Well, we're trying to help here," instead of saying, "Well, no, that's not a thing. That's not a thing. Just stop, go away. Show us when you have proof." They did their research. That's why they announced this. It's a thing. We
Mm-hmm.
have to face it. And as the industry works, and as us fans, we are fanatics, truly, especially about specific games we love. If someone says, "Well, you're addicted to that," and we have to say, "Well, no,"
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's one of those things where if you've drunk too much, if you drink too much, and someone calls you an alcoholic, and you say no, well, maybe, and then they go so far as to have an intervention. Well, maybe you need to
Mm-hmm.
look at it a little closer instead of denying it. And the fact is, like, it's something that we do have to face. And I know I feel miserable about a lot of the game stuff because, as someone who works in the games industry, a lot of times, and the fact that I worked in gambling for a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
you have to come face to face with the fact that people could throw away their lives on
Oh
something that
yes.
you actually had a hand in doing. And that happens in video games, like,
Mm-hmm.
sorry, non-gambling games.
Yep.
Like, you have to face the fact that someone out there is such a fan of your game that they're going to be playing it night and day, literally sometimes.
Yeah. And yeah, and I think that is where this issue gets very tricky because
Yes.
when we talk about game addiction, there's basically two distinct areas. There are games that are just really, really good to play. There are games, again, we design games meant to trigger, endorphins in people's heads, the pleasure center. There's a reason why we play games like you play Planet Coaster, I play The Binding of Isaac. People play Fortnite. Pick a game. There's a reason why we do, because they're fun, they're entertaining, and like these games are meant to be played. They're designed that way because there's so much to do in them. So when
Right.
you're spending 10 to 15 hours playing them, you are being enjoyed. You're is an experience. Yeah, of course, Draken. Like it is like akin to people who get into their sports car on the weekend and drive up the coast, or people go read a good book or watch a movie. And this is when we get to the point. This is like the first like basic defense. Like people who are addicted at this level, who get to that point, they may have that addictive personality that we've talked about. There is a subset of people, as you said, as we all know, who are they are more likely to become addicted to this. Like we said with gambling, Like for myself, like I have no desire to spend time in a casino, but there are people, I've seen them when I visit my grandparents, who will spend 8 to 10 hours sitting in front of a slot machine, and the rest of the world disappears around them. Now, the other side when we talk about addiction in video games are games that are explicitly designed to prey on those people. That's when we talk about like gambling based games, free to play, the mobile market. Like these are the games where it's not about delivering a quality product, it's about hiding, the microtransactions and the monetizations. This is when when I've spoken to Ramin about several times when we've had him on, about those games that are designed explicitly around those specific triggers. Having bright, colorful lights, throwing up those deals like, oh my god, if you don't buy this right now, you're going to get a $19.99 value instead of spending $5,000 on this. Being able to tweak loot chances to make sure that people get something very early and then make it harder. Or, like, I still can't believe what Ramin told me about, like, games where the store will actually get more expensive based on how much you spend, because they know if you're willing to spend $30, maybe you'll spend $50 or $100. And at this point, this is when we get into very more of, like, that malicious topic, where the game is just outright being aggressive to get you to spend money.
Yeah, and I feel like that's why the industry needs to, admit this a little bit. It's not I don't feel like the players are the ones that should have to worry. Because you got like players, we're all the consumers, we play 10, 15 hours a week, sometimes 8 hours a day. Like I've it's been a while since I've played 8 hours a day, but I mean, come on, when I had 8 hours to spend,
yes.
I mean, that was something. Of course I'm going to do that. Of course I am. I mean, people will spend 8 hours playing outside or hiking. Why can't I do that indoors? See, for me, there's like, you got your hobby, I got mine.
Yeah.
Same with someone who goes to a casino for 8 hours. It sounds like sickness, but I mean, it could just be entertainment. It's when it becomes like, well, you've neglected work, you've been fired, you've lost your wife, you've lost your husband, like.
You're swimming in debt. Yep.
Exactly. That is the separator, at least in my mind, and that's the reason education is so important.
Yep.
And why we have to get on board here. Like, I've seen, because I've worked for these companies, and yes, there is a point at which they get into that, like, well, what can we do to attract this gamer? When I worked for this gambling company, like, of course, at first they're like, oh no, we want to be so upfront, we want to make sure everyone, if they have a problem, they have they have access to every way to get that problem taken care of and help and all that stuff. And then over time, as the company doesn't do well, they start thinking, well, how can we get that game that draws everybody in and makes them want to bet money? And why would we have a minimum of a quarter when we can have a minimum of $5? And you deliberately go after, and Ramin obviously knows this, like, very specifically.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've talked about the whale a million times, and that's where I feel like there's a problem. It's not because the whale is the person who, it could just be that they're wealthy, you don't know, but it could also be that they're in that problem sector, and you're egging them on, deliberately, because they are the reason that you're making money. And that's where the problem is, and that's the mentality that the game industry has to get rid of, and visibly has to get rid of, because when I go and play a game online and the options are, okay, spend $1 to get this, spend $5 to get that, best deal, spend $1,000. Like, I've never spent more than, well, maybe I've spent enough money on The Sims to be warranted having a problem, I think. But that was over time, over the course of years. I would never lay down $1,000 on any game.
No. Oh yeah, like for myself, like, I'm already price conscious as enough, with trying to make do now. There is no way in hell I'm spending $99 or $1,000 or whatever on a video game. Like, I don't care. Like, there's just no, like, I always say, like, I'm always having that trouble putting, separating price from content. You think I'm going to spend $500 on a single video game? That is not happening.
But what if it comes with a spaceship?
Oh yeah, or loot boxes.
Exactly, or loot boxes.
But your point about education, I think, is a very big one because again, there still is that misconception. I spoke to your friend Bill, who's
Yep.
running the Intellivision uh, Revive, and that cast will probably go in a few weeks, and that was an amazing one. And one of the things we talked about was how much the pop culture has viewed video games over the last 30 years. And despite how far we've come in terms of an industry and the content we put out, there's still people who view video games as, the stupid toy you give your child while you're busy working. Something that is just like, who cares? It's, akin to, here's a squeaky toy for a dog, go play with it. And they can't imagine a video game being thought provoking or being a piece of art, whether from any aspect. Because we also talked about, because they're working with Tommy Talwigo, we talked about video games live as well with that. But anyone who's played video games knows that there is legitimate art to what we do. There's a reason people love games like Gone Home, Journey, and even just like high quality games like even something like Fortnite or God of War, Ninja Gaiden. But people still view video games as just this one very generic thing. Like I saw
Yeah.
family members who like look at me and they snide and they say, "Oh, you just sit and play. Don't you get tired playing video games for like 5 to 6 hours a day?" Or again, like before I started Game Wisdom, like I was doing 8 hours as well. Like no, I don't just play one video game a day. I'm doing like 4 or 5 in that span of time. Like as you said, it's like akin to someone who like goes out and maybe they'll spend like an hour playing tennis, and then they'll go jog, and then maybe they'll go drive a car. Like yes, I'm spending this time, but I'm doing different things in there. Like there's a difference between playing Ninja Gaiden versus if I play, I don't know, Dead Rising, let's say, because I just did that. There's a massive difference in what you're doing, what the activity is doing for you. And I think getting the word out about that is just going to be more and more important.
Yeah, it's like what something that just came to my mind. It's like when someone solves a Rubik's cube, you're like, "Oh my God, that's impressive! You must be very smart. You solved that very complicated puzzle."
Mm-hmm.
And then I beat God of War. It's like, "Oh, well, that's a very violent game." Well,
Mm-hmm.
that's a game with a lot of depth and puzzles and like there's a lot going on in that game that actually is triggering your mind. Certainly, the violence is very upfront and in your face. But the fact is, people who play video games are puzzle solvers, and
Mm-hmm.
min-maxing is very mathematic oriented. Like there's a lot of logic that goes into it, and you're learning constantly. And I feel like that's part of one of those triggers for a lot of us might call that addictive
Mm-hmm.
because you're constantly trying to solve something. And that's the distinction we have to make
Mm-hmm.
when discussing like whether something is an actual like disease or whether it's just something that is actually learning and that kind of thing. Like I feel like we boil all of this down to the word this game is addictive instead of separating it, and I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that's a very important thing. Just like you say, Jess, that a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
you're handing them like a time waster,
Mm-hmm.
and you're right that that perspective still exists, especially in politics, and that's
Oh
dangerous.
yes. Mm-hmm. And of course, Draken's point there as well. Like I have family members again who say, you just sit and play video games all day, and then they go watch TV for 5 to 6 hours.
Right.
And yet, like, well, what can I say to them? Like, I'm not going to change their mind. But yeah, like that's kind of that big issue when it comes to separating a quality product versus something that is just outright, as you said earlier, that's outright designed to go after whales. And when I spoke to Rami about this, I think his point was really good as that distinction. If the game is engaging enough, and I'm willing to put that time into it, then that is not a dangerously addictive game. Like he brought up Civilization. People will play Civilization for 8 to 10
Oh
hours
God, yeah.
more than it like it's nothing, but the game is not encouraging you to do that. There's nothing in that game that's making you sit and play it. You're playing
Right.
because it's an interesting title. You want to see how things go. But then you turn to something like Clash of Clans or pick any mobile game where
Mobile
every
games are the
time you
worst.
load it up, there's an ad. Every time you go make a choice, oh, well, why don't you spend additional $50 on this? Oh, you just lost. Why don't you spend money and get an advantage? Like when the game is outright making it so that it's trying to break down your defenses to spend money like that. And again, for most of us, we see through that. Like you said, Rob, and like I'm sure for our audience here, you're not going to be spending $5,000 on a mobile game in the near future,
or losing your job, or
yeah,
flunking out of school.
But there are people who do that, and there are developers out there. I'm not going to name names, but I see them on Gamasutra who will blame the consumer on that. They'll say, "Well, it's their fault for being addicted to loot boxes. Why should we change?"
Yeah, and that's why I feel like loot boxes is, and that's one of the things that I'm embarrassed about for I know for games that I may or may not have worked on, because on one hand I'm very attracted to that idea. I like that idea, but on the other hand I know that is like that. That's like that. There's a scene in Venture Brothers where Dr. Venture is like the first episode, I think, and he takes this invention he made to like this review panel or whatever, and he's looking to get an award or grant money, and he presses the button and he's got this model city and it melts the city, and there's like, well, don't you see that this could be used for evil? And he's like, well, I guess so. And it's just one of those things where obviously that's gonna, like, people are gonna they're gonna spend all the money to get all the Pokemon. You got to have them all, and so it's just saying, you know what, keep spending money on this randomizer so that eventually you might be able to get all of this stuff, including the 1 in a million chance, even if you give us money. And that's where it becomes a little iffy and shady, and that's the kind of stuff that we do have to stop.
Yeah, like when I spoke to Ramin about it, like he says that he's fine with loot boxes if they're handled ethically. If you properly show someone, okay, if you spend money, you'll get a 20% chance for this, a 50% chance, and then those numbers are not being skewed. Because we see developers who will say, yes, it's a 50% chance, but maybe it's really a 35% chance in the code.
It's 50% chance 1% of the time.
Exactly. But the problem, as you said, is that it has been used in so many malicious ways that it has become like a toxic brand. It's an idea that, yes, it may not have anything wrong with it, but it's been associated to so many bad games that you see this. I mean, how many games have been released with loot boxes over the last year that people have now, it doesn't matter what it is, they will yell and scream about it.
Yeah, I blame Zynga for all of it. I just blame them. They're done.
I would say loot boxes are, what would we say was the difference? I think the big difference between loot box and gacha is that gachas usually allow you to manipulate the things, like by you spending more money or you having different kinds. Most of the time the loot box has a preset, like it will say 10% will pull from this, 20% will pull from that. Gotchas seem to be a little bit more complicated. Would you agree with that, Rob, or am I missing it?
I'll be offhand. I'll be honest. Like, I've been out of the gotcha terminology is so lost on me these days. Like I need my own refresher course on it.
Yeah, but yeah, like gotchas are just like they're a lot more, I think, complicated in terms of their design and what they I think they're a lot more confusing, which is another big point when we talk about addiction and these kinds of games. These titles will try to outright confuse you in terms of, oh, you need 70 green orbs to do this, but wait, you need 30 yellow moons for this one. But if you spend money, we'll give you 10 blue diamonds that can be converted into hearts, that can then be converted into orbs. Like, when you're, again, like, this is that point where you can, if you know the industry, as we said with education, if you're educated about how these things work, it's very easy to spot the good from the bad. But the vast majority of people don't have that education.
Yeah, and that's why I feel like self-regulation is a big deal, because if you don't regulate, someone else will, and that's when things get bad. Just like you were saying earlier, Jack, on like, yeah, that's when someone will call you an addict, when in fact you really are no more an addict to games than they are to television or whatever their hobby is. Like, if you say, well, that person hikes all the time, they'll be like, well, that's a healthy activity. Well, I'm learning problem solving skills and gaining intelligence as I do
Yeah.
it. Like, yeah, it is. I apologize that I'm bringing up old topics, but like it's one of those that I feel like I really want to talk about. And there's a lot to say, and I know there's still more to say, and I know there's a million opinions, and obviously mine is 100% the correct one. So, yeah, just joking. It is one of those things I feel it's very important, and I feel like we should be talking about it more instead of less. And I know that education, that games education thing is super important, and I hope that gal's work really goes a long ways, because it was really exciting to hear that kind of stuff. But I don't want to I don't want the games industry to be looked at as sweeping this under the rug or denying it exists, because there are too many companies out there who blatantly go after people who have this weakness, and it's troubling.
And if Ramin wasn't, swimming in NDAs, I'm sure he could say so many horror stories that he's had a chance to witness there.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
and I think that's like the Venture Brother example. I think is apt here, because anything in video games, as we've seen, can tilt the scales towards being engaging because it's great, or engaging because it's designed to get you to spend money. The same thing with loot boxes. I mean, when Team Fortress originally had the whole idea of letting items randomly drop, nobody thought that could be used for maliciousness, and now look at where we're at today, with like every free-to-play game having some kind of loot box equivalent. And it's just a very hard subject, because again, the game industry doesn't like regulation. We don't like standards. We don't like being told what we can and can't do. But when you have issues like this, it just becomes like, this is the kind of stuff that, as we said earlier with politicians, this is the stuff that people outside the industry notice. When they see a story of somebody spending $5,000 on their credit card, maxing it out because they want Fortnite skins or Clash of Clans characters or whatever, they jump on it. I mean, how many politicians last year, following the Battlefront 2 backlash, went on their own little platform saying, we will put in regulations for the loot boxes and all that.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that the games industry has basically created a lot of this terminology for ourselves, because it sounds so negative. Like, I'm addicted to this game. I'm a user of this game, And loot boxes, that doesn't sound terribly friendly. It sounds like some kind of piratey thing. It comes down to it, we're just fans of a thing, but at the same time, we have to acknowledge that some of us fans might have an issue with it, have a problem with it, and we have to help them. So that's all.
Yeah.
Bottom line.
And I think, games like Call of Duty, because a lot of people conflate violence with addiction. Oh, you're addicted to a game, so it must be violent, so you're going to become a serial killer. I mean, how many times have we heard somebody so-and-so plays a video game, then they did something bad, so it must be the video game's fault? And like we said, when it comes to these topics of violence and addiction and all that, it's not, just because you play video games doesn't make you a serial killer. The majority of people who play video games are fine with this. But there's always those fringe cases that get popped up. And they will, like we said, somebody who is addicted, like someone who's going to spend $5,000 to $10,000 and just shut off, they probably would have shut off to some other topic. We've seen people who become obsessed with, fantasy novels. We've seen people become obsessed with sports, racing, adrenaline seekers, so on and so forth. And if it wasn't one thing, it would probably be something else. But when it comes to a lot of these topics or these industries, they're not being targeted like when we do with video games. The same thing as we said with the free-to-play market. And like we said, just because you play Civilization or XCOM or Fortnite for 8 to 10 hours, we're not calling you an addict. Those games are not pressuring you to spend money. They're not pressuring you to say, oh, you leave the game now? Well, then you lose all this stuff. But there are games that do.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of stuff we need to be a little bit more observant about.
Yeah, for sure. I know one little aside. Way back when I think people were just starting to go into like movie releases in fan regalia, like
Hmm.
dressed as Darth Maul to go watch Star Wars: The Phantom Menace when it
Hmm.
came out. Oh, how ignorant we were back then.
Oh
Um,
yes.
but like I would think, oh, that's kind of strange. And then someone pointed out to me, well, it's no different than someone who goes wears their favorite player's jersey and paints their face to look like
Hmm.
the mascot. I'm like, oh, you know what? That's absolutely correct.
Yep.
Well done. You've evened the playing field, as it were.
Yep.
No, that's like exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
We're just fans of a different thing. That's all.
Yep. Definitely. And like we said, there's nothing wrong with people who are fans. The vast majority of them are not going to be screaming and ranting. They're not going to be going out to spend $10,000 on clothing or collectibles. But there's always that vocal minority that takes things too far. I mean, oh, we could easily segue into some of the whole, toxic fandom situation that we're seeing among, animes and movies and cartoon shows over the last few years. And, like, again, like, these shows and whatever, they're not explicitly targeting these people. There's nothing in them that's saying you must be a toxic fan.
Right. Yeah.
But there are people, but again, when it comes to video games, when we are outright targeting people by having flashing lights saying, buy this loot box, get a $5 deal now, save $55. Oh, great, Draken. Are you going to get me in trouble again like we did last week? Man. Didn't we, like, say, like, oh yeah, one week didn't we say something like Steven Universe is horrible and something like that? I know we've gone after in quotes there popular shows. Oh boy, there we go. Why don't you say that JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is horrible too? Let's just throw it all in. This won't end badly. El Gordo mentioned Let It Die earlier. I got someone stalking me saying how much because they didn't like my review of Let It Die. Oh, yep, exactly. Josh confirms Sword Art Online is bad. I think Rob, you better pull the ejector seat now. You better get out before they target you too.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. Although honestly, I don't. I probably have less to worry about than you.
Yeah. But to put I guess, tie a bow on our final topic for this week, then again, video games because you spend. Well, there we go. I like JoJo, but that before we turn this into an anime topic, let's wrap it up. When it comes to video games, like with any popular culture, because you love it, that does not mean that you're addicted. Even if you spend who knows how many hours each week playing a game or a genre, or just playing games in general. Games are designed by their nature to get you involved in them. And it's the same thing as someone who watches TV for 10 hours a day, somebody who must do the weekly crossword puzzle, or, every weekend they must go and drive their expensive sports car, or go play tennis, or anything like that. There's nothing wrong with that. But when an industry or when a specific thing is explicitly designed or manipulating itself to get people to spend money, and they knowingly and willingly are targeting those people, that's a major problem. And when you have games like that, and again, we've talked to examples like here, I've spoken to Ramin several times about this, but when your game is designed explicitly around those pools and triggers, that's when it's no longer considered fun and games. When your game is kind of either punishing me because I'm not spending money, or it's explicitly trying to wear me down to spend money, that's not good. When I'm not the one in control in that regard, that's when it gets malicious. And as a good case in point, when people release DLC for more content for their games, there's nothing wrong with that. If you're giving me 5 to 10 more hours of content or a brand new thing to do in your game and you're expecting money out of that, yes, I'll spend that. Again, it's akin to, my favorite book series just released a new book. Well, of course I'm going to buy it day one because I love the last three. But when you're trying to target things with tweaking results or knowing exactly the right colors and psychological conditions to put into your game to get people to spend money, that's when things take that dark turn. Oh boy, but my voice is starting to die on me, so I think
Yeah.
we'll wrap things up here. For you folks watching this live right now, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back around 9:30, 10 Eastern for a multiplayer game night featuring Borderlands 2. If you like our discussions and want to talk more about game design with us, you'll find the link to our Discord channel open to everybody at the basic tier down below. Rob, have you done or are you still planning on doing any more streaming on your end?
Probably when I move, basically when I move, I'm going to get 2 hours of my life per day back that I will not have to commute with anymore. So I'll probably wind up going back a little bit to that, and I'm excited about it. I'm finally setting aside time to play games for the first time in forever. So once I'm getting back in that habit, I'll probably stream a bit more.
Great. And we will be back. Great. And we will be back next week around 3:30 EST for another live chat. For those of you watching this record and would like to get this ad-free and uncut, be sure to check out patreon.com/GWBicer. VIP supporters, that's $5 or more, will get all of our talks like that, as well as all of our podcasts as well, such as our chat with Ramin, which I believe that one is going to be going up this week. It's always great to talk to him about games, and we'll see what comes up from that. But that's going to do it for this week. So, Rob, once again, thank you so much for being my co-host. I'm sure we'll talk more on Discord. And again, thank you so much for getting me in touch with Bill.
Of course.
That was probably one of my favorite podcasts I've done in some time, just talking to him about games.
Such a fun guy to talk to.
Mm-hmm. So, with that said, thanks again for tuning in. Have a great rest of Sunday afternoon for you guys watching this live. And we'll see you all next week. And I'll see you for our regular streams over the next few days. Until then, take care.